So when I sat for all those years and all that time in nature, I pretty much just opened my heart fully and opened my mind to what was in front of me to like integrate with it so I can learn more about myself and the human condition in general.
I'm so happy to have the chance to speak with you today, Jeremiah, because everything that you write about and the pictures that you take resonate so much with me that I'm really looking forward to learning more about you and the work that you do.
Wow. Okay. Thank you for allowing me to be here and have this conversation. I was looking forward to it, and that's actually rewarding for you to say that what I share resonates because when you share things that are really vulnerable, you don't know how it lands, and try to let go of that expectation of it needing to land with anyone is kind of part of the process, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So, why don't we just start and maybe talk to me a little bit about how you first started as a photographer?
Okay. My first entry into photography was I was in fourth grade in elementary school. Somehow, I don't quite remember the details, but I was put into another class outside of my normal class where we focused on art and it was photography specifically. So I was put in this photography class where I got to go in a dark room. I borrowed my uncle's Minolta SRT 102 35 millimeter film camera and was able to go take pictures. They taught us how to make photographs and then go into the dark room and make them. And in that experience in the dark room of like, you're a little kid, it's like watching magic, right? And then the light is red and it's dark and it's a mysterious. So it's like this kind of otherworldly experience as far as like making the photographs themselves in the dark room. And then at the end of that class, they had this photo contest where like the whole school, the high school kids and everybody like had this open call photography contest. And I ended up winning it with a photograph that I made in fourth grade. And
Nice.
so that ended up kind of like implanted in me where like how I saw the world and what I can create, other people appreciated and valued. And so that kind of just stuck with me. Like, you're so young and impressionable as like this identity was instantly formed with this process, right? And so you grow up and you become a teenager and like photography is not cool with your friends. And, so it kind of ebbed and flow. I didn't stay consistent with it. But there'd be times where I just found myself kind of alone and like want to make photographs to like communicate, like to express myself. And so I kind of came back to it here and there throughout my life, but it wasn't really till I came back to it when I had a separation with my ex-wife about 6 years ago. And I just had this need for a creative outlet. And so I started photographing seriously in terms of I grew up here in Hawaii. I lived most of my life here in Hawaii, and the ocean and waves and surfing and all the ocean activities are very much part of life. And so I started photographing waves and surfing. So in the water with the camera with the housing, I would photograph the waves that I would surf, and it was just this way to extend that experience. And then I just kind of pursued that for a while, like really got into it, or I was traveling around the world and just kind of surfing and making photographs on my own budget. Only time I wasn't getting paid for it, but I would submit my photos to different outlets on social media and then kind of started building a little bit of a following in that. And then, as you know, surfing can be dangerous and wave photography can be dangerous. So I had a number of concussions from just taking some waves on the head and put myself on land to recover. I started a yoga practice at the same time. And so I just started with landscape. I was like, I'm going to go sit in landscape and just started that kind of this meditative process. Then I took my first class at Pacific New Media with David Ulrich, who's my professor. And I went in there and it was like my first introduction to fine art photography. And it was just like what is this? Like, this is amazing. This is like what I want to do. And so it just shifted everything for me, like in terms of the art form of like learning how to communicate as a visual artist. And then his specific way of teaching is from this lineage of spiritual practice of photography, a practice of self-realization through the art form and through the creative process itself, which was very much in line with my yoga practice. I'm also a yoga instructor. And so it's like, here's this photography practice that is very much in line with what I do in the yoga space. And so it's just like, has been this path for me that just has opened so many aspects to life up. Yeah.
Interesting. So the way you talk about photography as a process of self-reflection and self-realization and a path
Yeah.
and a journey,
Yeah.
what is it about yourself that you are discovering?
In the last body of work I worked on was a landscape project where I worked with it for about 3 years. And for me, it was just an inner question, an inner desire. I want to go and look at nature as if it's a human being, to look at the inner dynamics, like the inner relationships, like what is air doing with water and what is fire and earth, and like what are those relationships and what are those mechanics actually doing, and what, and if anything, is it communicating, so I can learn more about myself. I want to go inward within this process. And that was just like a natural calling from inside of me, just bringing in myself to that inward space to just like to listen what's there. We're taught to like respond to the body more than to our eyes. And so I just like, I get in a certain area and be like, something would grab my attention from inside. And then whether it was a tree or of a little body of water, or a section of both, like I'd sit, and then I would do long exposure black and white work. And so I would set up my tripod, and I literally, like old school, like I'm shooting digital, but like I'd put a hood over my head and shut out everything else except for what was in the frame. And then I just explore it. So I'd sit maybe for about an hour making photographs of just one thing, and then just kind of fleshing out what's really like beyond my original attention, like what depth that thing or that space or that visual representation had to say. And what I learned is our deeper mind, which we call the unconscious, which communicates to us in our dreams and things outside of our analytical mind, speaks in symbols and metaphors. I was finding these metaphors or this resonance in the world that was literally like my inside of myself was trying to show me what's there through my photography. So it wasn't till like the end of the project, like I really even understood the project itself, like until I put the pictures together and then I had to build a sequence. It was just like, oh, then the real artist statement came out, and it was just a clear understanding of what I'm doing. Because when you're just in the process, you're in like there's like stages to it. Like you're in the gathering stage, and sometimes you get lost in it and then you want to withdraw, or you like don't think. But that's the push and pull of you knowing what it's about and then what it's about showing itself. So there's a surrender in the process. And if you can progress beyond the surrender and actually like give in to the creative process and the energy that's trying to communicate in that project, then you can begin to understand that dialogue of how it wants to speak to you.
I find it fascinating, that balance between going in with some structure and some idea of what it is you're trying to do, but then also being open to whatever emerges without trying to control it too much.
Yes.
So just have some
Yeah.
direction maybe, but also responding to what's coming. What would you say are some of the themes that have emerged when you do step back and look at your work?
It was great. I mean, when you asked me that earlier before this moment, I went back and looked at my archives, and kind of the one consistent theme that stood out the most was presence. And like whether it was in my wave photography or my landscape, and you especially see it in my portraiture, is there's this presence that becomes palpable in my images. Like it's kind of beyond the context of the image itself. It's just a combination of the lighting or the forms, but it's really about presence is kind of in all my photographs.
The fact that through your photographs you can elicit presence, that also based on the fact that you yourself make yourself very present in the moment while you're doing photography.
That's an interesting thing that kind of like arrived seeing myself through that reflection point. Like, oh, so that means like for me to pull that out, it means I have to embody it. So like I must be like, like it's this kind of self-realization, right? Like, oh, this is the theme, and then this is what I embody. And it's just kind of good to know, like, to locate yourself, right?
Well, I guess I was trying to make a connection to your yoga practice, because
Yes.
I am not a very good practitioner of yoga, in part because I find it very difficult to be still and be present. And it's something I need to work on. And meditation is even harder, but yoga is almost at least a physical version of meditation.
True. Yeah.
So I'm attracted to it for that reason. But I think it's an amazing quality to be able to just be still and so mindful of what's around you that, like you said, the subjects of your photographs, they come to you. You're very open to whatever it is that they are putting out, and then you capture that in your images.
Yeah. I feel like you describe kind of the encounter pretty accurately, like how it comes to me versus me projecting out into the world what I want to see.
Well, that's hard to do. I think that's an amazing gift. I think that's an amazing thing to be able to do, because it's also part of not having expectations. And when you let go of expectations, you don't have to be quite as anxious about how things turn out, what the outcome is, because you have released that, not worried
Yeah.
about what's coming. How would you compare your photographs of landscapes to portraits of people in the experience for you? How are those different?
I think for me, how I approached my landscape was the first observation I made was like how I observed the landscape specifically in the very beginning is, and I think it's a common experience for most everyone, is when we look at nature, we just accept it for what it is. Like we look at this perceived imperfection of like the jagged rocks or the trees, and some are dying, some are alive, some are sideways, some are straight, some are crooked, and we just look at it and we just accept it and we just allow that beauty to come in. But when we look at people, we don't look at through the same lens. And we tend to have judgments, or we put up barriers. And so there's all these layers of interference when we look at people versus the landscape in general. And so when I started my portrait project, that's how I bring myself to the actual encounter of the collaboration. Is I bring an open heart and an open mind, and I look at them with no judgment, with no projection, and just bring myself into as much of an unconditional state as I have. And I'm in my own layers of that. But I've been in this project for a little over a year, and it's evolved from that in the sense of the process and then the depth of the experience and the encounter itself. Because as I'm opening myself to my collaborators and they open themselves to me, I'm finding myself at my limitations as well as them. And in that, with this desire to open myself further, it's healing for me. So I find this healing that happens because as I face my own fears and limitations, they become known. And then I sit with them and process them, which gives me more capacity to hold somebody in this space that I'm creating in this portrait experience.
Is there anything that you explicitly say or do at the beginning of a photo shoot with a person to help create that kind of environment for them?
Yes. Even though words are very few in the process, I actually start it before we even have the session, meaning when a photographer approaches somebody it's like, hey, let's go make photographs. I find that the person who's asked has an immediate outward experience. So their energy and their focus is outward. Like, how am I going to look? Right? There's a camera looking at me. There's not only me, the photographer, looking at them, the camera represents everybody else, right? So it's not just this intimate encounter with one person. When I put the camera in my hand, it represents the world to them, right? Like everyone else. And so what I do is I give them just some direction on what to wear, but within that direction, I'm intentionally bringing their focus inward. I just give them guidance. Hey, like, I want you to go into your closet and find an outfit that brings a smile to your face, that makes you happy. And then wear that to the photo shoot, and then go back into your closet after that outfit, and then find something that makes you curious. And so they go in the closet, and it's usually an outfit that they bought, but they haven't worn yet. And it's just like, oh, I had this thing, I haven't worn it, but I was really curious about it. And that just lends to a deeper understanding of them, because it's like what we're curious about is usually a door to our desires, what we desire for ourselves. And usually those desires are based on emotions we want to feel versus a thing itself. And so in asking them just to go pick out clothes, I'm already bringing them to a state of inward process. So they're going from worrying about how they look on the outside to thinking about how they feel as they choose their clothes. And so now they're kind of inward from the beginning before we start. And then in the space we sit, I have them just kind of collect themselves with the breath, and then just take them through a meditation to where I ask them 3 questions. And the first question being where they are in relationship to their past. And then the second question, I ask them to reflect on where they are in relationship to their desires. And then the third question I ask them is where they are in relationship to both their past and their desires. So they can locate themselves. It's kind of like past, future, and then locating themselves in the present moment. And then I sit, and after I ask them that, they close their eyes, and there's no time limit. And when they're ready, they just open their eyes. And it's usually I'll have my camera in my lap, and then I look into their eyes, and we just have a gaze, and I just feel myself in the moment to when I want to make photographs intuitively, and then how long I want to hold that tension, right? And then I'm also feeling them, right? And usually what happens is I feel what they're feeling in their body, and they're kind of seeing themselves through me, is what usually happens.
Do you continue talking, or does it go silent at that point?
I just say, here's the question, and I ask them to ask themselves that in their own mind, and it's just quiet. And we sit in stillness, we sit in silence, and it's just a gaze between 2 people, and it ebbs and flows, because I can see the longing for someone to be seen come out, and then I see the fear of showing that also, which pulls them back. And it's just this oscillation of expanding and contracting. And not everybody opens up for sure, but when they do, I feel a certain sensation in my body in a specific location that's like, here they are, and then just to hold them in that moment, to allow themselves just to show all of themselves.
Wow. I find it so interesting. Just the way you were describing it, I was trying to picture what it would be like. And I wonder if it also comes from your experience doing landscape, because you're not talking to the wave, and the wave is not talking to you in words anyway. But maybe that's your process in a way, because it came from just feeling as opposed to interacting the way we normally would, giving direction maybe, or asking them how they're feeling, or it's all on a very intuitive level, it sounds like.
Yeah. And I also found, like, kind of after months doing this, there's this other dynamic of, like, in yogic philosophy, there's 2, like, not just in yoga philosophy, like we live in like a material world, meaning like a three-dimensional world, and like there's polarity, right? Duality, right? And one of those dualities is this masculine and feminine. And like me being a man, and a lot of my sitters are women, and I've begun to sit with men now in the project, that just evolved for its own reason. Um, there's duality of energies of masculine and feminine, and in yogic philosophy, the masculine is can be expressed as the holder of space, and the feminine being space itself. So you have both form and formlessness. And I feel like intuitively, I just brought myself to being this holder of space, which is this masculine energy, which exists in all living things. It's not because it's my gender, I'm a man, like I have feminine energy within me. And because I can hold this space in this way, it allows the sitter or my collaborator to move into their feminine energy, which allows them to fill that space. And so that they become fluid. And in that fluidity, it's like their emotional landscape, right? This deeper layer of how we're really experiencing life. Like there's all the roles we have, all the hats we wear in life, but we're having this inner experience, right? And so all that emotionality of our inward experience that we don't express still stays inside, and we carry it around with us in our daily lives. And so there's just in this one moment, in this one encounter, they can just pour that emotionality out. So I've witnessed deep trauma emerge in this experience. I've witnessed integrationness, like people really integrated with who they are emerge. And so there's all that variation of everything in between when they become fluid and allow themselves to be held, and like them kind of encountering themselves in a way of they're not withholding that anymore inside of them.
They're showing it to you and to
Yeah,
all of us,
right.
represented by your
Yeah.
camera. So tell me what you feel about vulnerability, the idea of vulnerability, because it's very much a part of your work and you write about it.
Yeah, I felt like through experience that vulnerability is this tool. It's a tool that we can allow ourselves to implement in our relationships, that it like literally is giving permission to the other to de-armor themselves. And because of our limits, like our fears that we hold in our mind and our body for protection, which actually like limits our ability to express ourselves or to feel things in our life, when somebody just opens up more than the other, it gives them like permission to like let go of the armor, and they usually it's usually reciprocated. So it's like here's a door, here's somebody giving you permission to share what they're holding. And so I find that in a conversation, or just in a moment or an experience, whether it's one-on-one or in a group setting, that I find if I just take initiative in the conversation, be like, hey, this is what I've experienced in my life, or this is what I'm feeling in this moment. And like, it's an emotional risk, right? Like, and that's what like really courage is, right? And so like courage has this narrative of being this masculine trait of being strong and brave. And that's a very masculine perspective, which meaning it has form, right? So it has structure to courage. And so I view courage as being the formlessness or feminine, right? Fluid. And that fluidity, courage is the opening, is the releasing, is the letting go. And so it's like to be courageous is to be vulnerable, is meaning to be open. So it means opening yourself. And I find that that inspires other to do the same, or at least contemplate doing it, because everybody is at relationship with themselves, right? Like, it's not always going to be linear, right, in a response. And so I just find if I take initiative, whether it's in my art or in my yoga class or just in a conversation having coffee, to share something from a deeper space within me, like it just opens a door for them to do the same. And they don't necessarily have to walk through it, but it was just an opportunity, that we can create for each other.
After a session is finished,
Yeah.
especially for the people who have opened up, and you
Yes.
said maybe they expressed themselves in ways they weren't even expecting, whether it was
Yeah.
very integrated or whether they released trauma. Do you talk to them about that experience after? And do they realize what's happened? Do they know that they made themselves open and that they were able to see something in themselves maybe that they didn't know?
Yes to all of that, and it's not a yes to every single one, because in the beginning of the project I was like very much a participant than the actual orchestrator, right? And so as I learned about what was happening, and it was like I was learning through them in terms of the feedback I was getting. I was like sat with married women who are like, I showed you more than I've showed my partner. And it was like, and it's this mechanism of safety and trust. And within that container, if you want to call it that, of feeling safe and trusting somebody, they really presented themselves, in their minds to the world, not just me. And so there's an integration process that happens afterwards that now I've been really conscious of, not so much guiding them through, but letting know that I'm a partner along in that process, because it really is self-realization for them, right? Like they're finding their own answers, and I can't give it to them, even though we had the shared experience, but I let them know they're not alone in that process. And so sometimes, most times I'll communicate to them and like, I'll just sit with what shows up. And then even if nothing showed up, sit with that. Like, why are you holding back? Sit with that. And like, there's a layer of discovery there. But yeah, I very much make myself accessible as whatever support they need and whatever I have to offer, because I've kind of, I've done this project with myself. I set up my camera on a tripod and I took myself through this process. And I was like, whoa, I don't even know if I made it past the first question, to be honest. Like something showed up for me. And I'm like, okay, I just turned the camera off and I sat with what showed up. And it was very revealing and very healing in the sense of I was able to sit with what showed up to process it, But yeah, I continue to have communication with them and offer whatever support I have is just somebody that shared that experience. And then somebody who also is very familiar with integrating in general as we expand our perspective.
In the moment during the experience of photographing a subject, why do they trust you?
I mean, I'll answer from myself versus the feedback I get, because I really, really put a lot of intention, because it's such an intimate interaction. And when there's intimacy, all your energies are activated. And I intentionally hold myself in a state of non-reaction. And so I really just empty myself of my own energy, even though I can feel it being activated as you interact with somebody. All your energy centers like are activated. And within intimacy, yes, there's a sexual tension that happens, but I don't respond to it or project onto it. And so therefore, when they sense me not reacting in that way at all, they perceive safety in that. And what I'm finding is, because I asked them where they are in relationship to their desires, and I asked them to grab an outfit that they're curious about. And what I find is we're all kind of withholding this kind of sexual energy within us. And very much so in women, that don't feel safe because they've been sexualized objectively in imagery, in photography, specifically in media, in movies, in our societal imagery, right? In advertising, the female form has been abused and objectified generationally. And so I'm really, really sensitive and very deeply compassionate about the female experience in our society. And I think that's where I started the project from. I had somebody ask me that in my class, like, why'd you start making photographs with women, not men? And what came out in that conversation was it was out of deep empathy and compassion for their lived experience, to the suffering that they've experienced as being objectified and like oppressed, and to have to shrink and be small, to not feel safe to be a sexual being because they've been used and abused that way. And there's so much depth of suffering in that I'm just aware of what I'm aware of, and I haven't lived that in the terms of, I have not lived as a woman, but in my own personal lived experience as a man, I have experienced deep trauma in the same regards as a very female experience, and so I think that allows me to have compassion because I see myself in the female experience, and that's kind of where it started, was this empathy for that. And how I evolved to start working with men is, and I was continually asked, because in my class I have a number of female artists, photographers, or exceptional artists, and they'll ask me like, why aren't and even my professors, like, why don't you do this with the other gender? And what showed up for me is I didn't feel safe with other men. And that was a truth that came in the project, is like, I didn't feel safe with other men because of my experiences with other men in terms of being abused or mentally abused or being violently engaged, and having those interactions. And, if it wasn't for this project, I don't know if I would have been able to find the safety in opening myself to another man if I didn't have this healing through the feminine or with women. And so I started to have these sessions with men and sitting open-heartedly, emptying myself, holding them, and sitting in deep intimacy. And I find that they respond very similarly to women. Like, there's, aside from our archetype roles that we have in society, we're very much the same. We're very much the same. Men want to be as fluid as a woman as wants to have structure in her life. Both exist in the other.
And that makes sense from what you said earlier too, that it's not gender specific. We all have a mix of masculine and feminine energies that may be more dominant at different times or in different circumstances. What was it like the first time you sat down with a man to do a session?
I describe it as I had built up enough confidence through enough repetition, right? Just practice, that I felt confident in myself to open up. And this particular person shared a desire that, like, he wanted to be more emotionally available in his friendships and his romantic relationships, just in life in general. So I'm like, in that conversation, I just mentioned, hey, I'm doing this project. I think this would be a great opportunity to explore that, which already gave me a construct in my mind of like where he was at, right? And so that gave me another level of confidence, like, okay, he's withdrawn inward emotionally. So therefore, I'm going to come to this experience to help maybe him to explore opening that up. And because I had a couple conversations with him before we had the photo session, I think that gave me some comfort, knowing kind of his energy, and then knowing kind of like, not somebody who's dangerous, right? And so, there's a combination of that. But when we got into the session, and what I've found with the men I've worked with they do struggle to access this emotional, more fluid state within themselves. It ends up being almost an obstacle for them. And so the encounter is very much of them finding their own limitations of what's keeping them from just opening up. And so those sessions end up being more focused on that versus the exploration of other things, right? Like the desires and finding themselves in the present moment. I find most of the time, most of the silence is being held for them to encounter their own limitations. And I haven't had lengthy discussions on like why that is. It's just me. This project is just an observation, right? Trying to be as objective as possible without projecting my own thoughts or my own feelings onto the project. But I find that the men I've worked with, they struggle to open up.
Can you see a difference in the images? And it could be also among women. Some may be able to be more open, some are less able to be open.
Yeah.
Or the way you're describing it sounds like the men overall tend to have more difficulty showing themselves. Can you see a difference in the images?
Difference in the images, I would say, yes, the images reflect how they are within themselves. So that's different. And so if the encounter is bringing them to them observing, them holding back and what's holding them back, because if they're being given an opportunity to show themselves and they hold back, I think what's presenting within them is what's holding them back. And when they come to awareness of that, I think that's where their focus and energy is at in that moment. And those images are a lot about that. I've had women want to end the session and not open up. And so it's like both exist. It just, maybe there's a tendency because of that feminine energy, when they feel safe, it's natural for them to be fluid and open up and show their emotion. And men hasn't been conditioned by our environment to make that such an easy process. Even though it's accessible and it's there, it's just, have they been able to walk around and like embody this aspect of the self, right? The softer version of them, right? Like this part that wants to flow and be fluid, which is their emotions, right? So, I think men have been conditioned to hold that back, to be that structure, right? To be in that masculine energy to where they're always holding themselves together. And that's what I'm really finding the commonality within the whole project itself beyond gender is like our environment moves us out of a natural state of being, which forces us to hold ourselves together. Where when you look at nature, it's in harmony, it's in balance. So it has structure, but when it's time for something to die and decay, it just does. It falls, it flows, like the water comes in and erodes the ground, and there's no resistance to it. It's our resistance that we create within ourselves because in our environment, we don't feel safe. So therefore, we're constantly in this conflict of holding ourselves together, which reassociates our relationship to ourselves. Because when we find these conflicts within ourselves and they're not comfortable, we haven't made uncomfortable norm, right? We haven't made being uncomfortable normalized in our everyday life. So we just push it away, but it doesn't go away. And that's what I'm finding out in the project is we all have this innate nature that wants to let go, that wants to flow, that wants to be fluid. And it's very much, I feel, in line of the nature of creation itself, right? Creation being a very feminine energy. and that we're all born of and we're a part of. And so we find these conflicts within ourselves because of how we're trying to navigate life in whatever part of society or culture that we're in, which is different everywhere for everyone.
I imagine, as you grow your body of work, the people will be able to anticipate what the experience is going to be like during a session. They know that that's what you're about, and it's about being open and showing yourself and letting yourself be seen. Do you usually ask people to do their portraits, or do people come to you for that and looking for that kind of experience with you?
I usually ask people, but within community, people know about the project. I can see somebody who's like wants to do it, like they're curious, and then I'll just go ask them. But I can see it in their eyes, like, oh, they would like to be part of it. And then so when I ask them, they're like, oh, great, I really wanted to be, like that kind of thing. So I think the asking of me to be part of it would be a big, really courageous act for somebody to do that. So that hasn't quite happened yet, but I do recognize the people that want to do it that just haven't asked. So I asked them instead. And the one thing I try to be intentional about is try not to give too much of the process away, because I can observe from my own experience that the mind will start to construct expectation. And then because of the nature of the mind wanting to create an idea of what to expect, they start constructing a persona of what they want to show. And so therefore, I feel like sometimes the people I collaborate with, if I divulge too much information, I think that ended up hindering the opening, because I think the mind went to work before the actual encounter to create an identity, because it's trying to protect itself. That's what the mind does. The mind wants to protect our heart and our emotional body and our emotional being, so we don't get hurt, so we can live. It's kind of the nature of the mind to construct those things so we can stay alive in this world, right? If we don't become aware of that controlling nature of the mind, we can get lost in the finite, meaning in these layers of identity that might be well removed from who we truly are.
I like to think that I would volunteer because I'm so curious about your process and what it would be like, but it also could be because I'm safely here in Montreal and you're all the way in Hawaii. So the chances of that happening are quite slim. That's easy for me to say. I would want to do it.
Yeah. And like what I tell all my collaborators in that guidance I give them before we do it is just like, do your best to be yourself. That is all that is needed, is just to be yourself. And whatever that is, whatever layer that is, there isn't a need to put up a barrier. You don't need to protect yourself from yourself, right?
Well, it's almost the opposite. You have to take a barrier down, because it sounds like the easiest thing in the world to just be yourself. And on the other hand, like you said, once the mind starts running through that, my first thought is, well, who's that? I was like, be myself? Yeah. What do you mean, Jeremiah? Yes. What is that all about? Let me think about that.
Yeah, it's fascinating. It's for me, I just so fascinated with the human condition. And the more I learn, the more I find out I don't know, and the more I want to be as neutral as I can. So that really allows me, I think, to be present in the experience, because what's been revealed, it helps me to remove anything I'm going to project onto the project, because I see how sacred of an act this is.
Thank you so much, Jeremiah. I really appreciate your time.
Sarah. And then we'll be in contact.
Absolutely. Okay. Very good. Have a great rest of your day.
You too.
Thanks. Bye.